lot of the people who embrace alarm don't embrace what I think obviously follows from that alarm, which is the willingness to make strategic and political decisions you find personally discomforting, even though they are obviously more likely to help you win, right? Taking political positions that'll make it more likely to win Senate seats in Kansas and Ohio and Missouri. Trying to open your coalition to people you didn't want it open to before, running pro-life Democrats. And one of my biggest frustrations with many people whose politics I otherwise share is the unwillingness to match the seriousness of your politics to the seriousness of your alarm.
You just heard from Ezra Klein, author of This Abomination and co-author of This Abomination called Abundance, which pushes a rebranded version of neoliberalism that he thinks will help Democrats become relevant again, even though this corporate-friendly approach to governance is what destroyed the party's reputation with working-class people in the first place. But Klein thinks that if you repackage neoliberalism and give it a new name, it'll revitalize the party somehow. Now, we don't have time to get into Abundance, but I'll link you to a 53-page report from the Revolving Door Project, which debunks the misinformation pushed in Abundance and explains in painstaking detail how this agenda would predictably embolden corporations at the expense of working class people. But aside from Klein's conservative economic agenda, you just heard him promote a more conservative social agenda for Democrats too, and he claimed that we need to get comfortable doing things that we don't want to do if we're serious about winning, like running literal pro-life Democrats, i.e. forced birthers. Yeah, I mean, while we're at it, maybe Democrats should also be more hawkish on immigration and adopt a pro-genocide platform and campaign with Republicans like, say, Liz Cheney in order to win over so-called moderates. We've never tried that before, but I'm sure it's going to work out well. Hell, what if Democrats just ran as pro-Trump Republicans and they denied the results of the 2020 election and called for the prosecution of fellow Democrats? I mean, this is quite literally if you can't beat them, join them approach to politics. And I dismiss it if he wasn't so influential. But the problem is that people like him are respected by Democrats, even though this individual does not know what he's talking about, like he's giving them advice that will destroy the party. But they're listening. Neera Tanden, for example, said people should take Klein's recommendation seriously and actually open their minds to anti-abortion Democrats to expand the tent. And they're just two of many saboteurs who seem hell-bent on solidifying the Democratic Party's descent into perpetual irrelevance. Another is a new organization called the Searchlight Institute that just materialized to do the same exact thing. Adam Jentleson, the group's founder, argues, right now we're pursuing every tactic imaginable except for the obvious one, which is taking positions that are more in line with the people we are trying to win over, i.e. not the left. They're talking about conservatives. And its organization is pushing Democrats to de-emphasize issues like queer rights and climate change in order to win over moderate voters in battleground states. There's also former Democratic Party politicians like Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp who are reinforcing this idea on mainstream media that Democrats have to shift to the right if they ever want to win elections, even though that same strategy cost them their seats in the Senate. And Joe Manchin, an oil baron, is joining this chorus of idiots to say the exact same thing, that they have to shift to the right to win over the people that they need to win elections.
I was a Democrat all my life. They better figure out how they lost people like me. Okay? And the only thing I have said, when you quit worrying about the working person, their working conditions, you're worried more about a person that's able-bodied and capable of working that won't work versus me who will work. There's something wrong. And they lost me.
First of all, you are in no way comparable to the average voter, and the Democratic Party lost people like you because of people like you who prioritize the profits of large multinational corporations over the well-being of your own constituents. As Warren Gunnels points out, by refusing to extend the $300 a month child tax credit, Joe Manchin caused the child poverty rate to go from 5.2% to 12.4%. He represented one of the poorest states and is now a Wall Street lobbyist. The Democrats lost the working class because of Wall Wall Street, quote, Democrats like him. Precisely, and Democrats aren't even trying to hide that fact. It's why Hakeem Jeffries met with Silicon Valley oligarchs after the election before he met with anyone else, because even though the party lost support with multiple demographics, the number one priority for him was to mend fences with rich people in Silicon Valley first. But according to Ezra Klein, the way to rejuvenate the party is to give an even bigger middle finger to the base and cut environmental regulations and embrace forced birthers, because that's what we have to do if we're serious about defeating the authoritarian right. If you don't allow Democrats to shift further to the right, then you're not serious about defeating fascism. It doesn't matter that their strategy of triangulation and neoliberalism is what got us here in the first place. We've got to double down on that losing strategy. Otherwise, Ezra Klein will think that you're not serious about taking back power. And to reiterate, this is the accepted conventional wisdom in DC among Democrats. They're listening to people like Ezra Klein and not people like us. For example, Kamala Harris, who ran as a genocide-supporting immigration hawk who avoided trans rights like the plague, is now joining Gavin Newsom, Rahm Emanuel, Pete Buttigieg, Seth Moulton, and other Democrats in throwing trans people under a fucking bus, writing in her memoir, "I agree with the concerns expressed by parents and players that we have to take into account biological factors such as muscle mass and unfair student athletic advantage when we determine who plays on which teams, especially in contact sports." Right, except that's already what schools are doing, but the core issue is that she gave into right-wing framing when she should have rejected the premise of the issue altogether, because this is not an issue. And I say that because at the K through 12 level, there are approximately just 5 known trans athletes in the entire country. You can literally count them on one hand. Now, at the collegiate level, there are more. There are 10 trans athletes at that level. You need 2 hands to count them. Nonetheless, it's a pretty small number of people given the total number of athletes that exist. Your children are statistically more likely to be eaten by a shark or struck by lightning than they are to encounter one of the 15 trans athletes in the entire country. This is a complete non-issue, and rather than capitulating, Democrats should explain that it is wrong to attack this already marginalized group of people for political gain. They should explain how Americans are focused on the wrong 1%. It's rich people who are the real threat to their families, not trans people. But it's easier to capitulate than it is to just make the case, I guess. Although I will say, with regard to Kamala in particular, she at least did admit that Joe Biden's response to the Gaza genocide was, quote, inadequate, and she says that she pleaded with him to show more empathy for innocent Palestinians. But even though she's trying to placate us in the event she runs for office in the future, she's only further proving to us with this comment how out of touch she is, because we didn't want him to performatively show empathy. We wanted him to cut off the fucking weapons to Israel. Furthermore, she, as a candidate, could have done that herself, but she didn't. And her response, which was also inadequate, arguably cost her the election, seeing as how 29% of 2020 Biden voters didn't show up to vote for Harris in 2024, who said that ending the violence in Gaza was their number one issue. So if anybody's response was inadequate, it's Joe Biden, sure, but it's also yours, Kamala. But this is emblematic of a broader problem with the Democratic Party. They are extremely out of touch with their base. They've been supporting a genocide for almost 2 years now. They refuse to support policies like Medicare for all. They won't fight Republicans, and they seemingly never miss an opportunity to spit in the eyes of their own base. The most recent example is the 95 Democrats who voted for a resolution honoring white supremacist Charlie Kirk. Jasmine Crockett pointed out a really interesting fact about the particular Democrats who supported that measure.
Is when I saw the no votes, there were only 2 Caucasians. For the most part, the only people that voted no were people of color, because the rhetoric that Charlie Kirk continuously put out there was rhetoric that specifically targeted people of color. And so it is unfortunate that even our colleagues could not see how harmful his rhetoric was.
Sounds about white. Now, one of the non-white Democrats to vote in favor of that resolution was leader Hakeem Jeffries, which sends a very specific message to the Democratic Party base. As this TikToker put it,
the problem that me and other people who think like me are having with this kind of shenanigans is it demonstrates to us that you're not in the fight for us. You're not in the fight for us. I don't know what you're doing over there, what you're thinking, why you're doing what you're doing. Only God knows. But it's not giving you're in the fight for us. Like, when all else fails and the things that they do don't make sense, I'm going to just be like, oh, AIPAC told them to do it. Because it doesn't make any sense other than that. Oh, AIPAC told you to do it. Oh, you didn't endorse Mamdani? AIPAC told you can't. Period.
And that's a reasonable assumption because to the base, it seems like that's how Democrats operate, probably because that's exactly how Democrats operate. They won't support Medicare for all because their health insurance donors won't let them support Medicare for all. They don't support public housing because their landlord and real estate donors won't let them support public housing. They won't stop supporting the Palestinian genocide because their AIPAC donors tell them that they have to keep supporting the Palestinian genocide. But to get back to the conversation about what direction the party needs to go in to win back voters, that debate is already settled, believe it or not, despite what people like Ezra Klein and Adam Jentleson will have you believe. So let's get to some cold hard facts about where the base is currently. Broadly speaking, comparative political science research from Europe finds that center-left parties do not benefit from pivoting to the right. Not only do they alienate their own bases, but they don't win over right-wing voters that they're pandering to because, quote, voters tend to prefer the original to the copy, which explains why Kamala Harris couldn't win over immigration hawks by shifting to the right on immigration and the border, assuming this data applies to the US, that is. But spoiler alert, it does. So what does the base want? Well, this might be hard for Ezra Klein to hear, but a Data for Progress poll commissioned by Jacobin and the DSA found that they prefer democratic socialism to capitalism by a 58-point margin, and they prefer left-leaning candidates like AOC, Zoran Mamdani, and Bernie Sanders, as opposed to establishment Democrats like Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and Nancy Pelosi. And these more left-leaning candidates do particularly well with non-college educated voters and Latinos, two groups that Democrats struggled with in the last election. And get this, the poll also found support for egalitarian policy positions among Republicans and independents. 70% of all respondents say that our economic system is rigged in favor of corporations and the wealthy and needs to be replaced. This includes 67% of independents and 58% of Republicans. Moreover, 59% of respondents and 58% of Republicans blame landlords and banks more than government regulation for the high cost of housing. 83% of respondents agree that social work and mental health are necessary parts of a public safety budget. This includes 81% of independents and 80% of Republicans. This is true across all partisan, racial, ethnic, geographic, and class groups. 15% of Donald Trump's own voters prefer democratic socialism to capitalism. These voters tend to be younger and non-white. This is from the same poll. Democrats and independents prefer a candidate who fights back against ICE raids, and they also prefer a candidate who fights for the rights of trans people. On top of that, Black and Latino Americans are consistently more left-leaning than white Americans. This is from the same poll. So, no, Democrats don't need to shift to the right to win back these groups. They need to shift to the left to bring out these people who are disappointed that their progressive worldview isn't being represented at the ballot box. Democrats need to activate these voters in order to win back power. But, don't take it from me. Take it from CNN data analyst Harry Enten, who explains where the base is at.
Look at this. Net popularity of socialism among Democrats. You go back to 2010, it was plus 7 points. Look how high it is now, up like a rocket, up to plus 36 points. That's a jump of nearly 30 points on the net popularity scale among Democrats in just 15 years. And I was looking at the polling from New York City, and what you see is the clear plurality of New York City Democrats think the idea of having a socialist mayor is a good idea, matching what we see nationally. The bottom line is socialism isn't a dirty word among Democrats at this particular point. It's actually a word that, when attached, Democrats seem to like it. Look at where we are right now in September of 2025. Look how much closer AOC is to the top now than Bernie Sanders was back a decade ago. She's at 12%, so she has 6 times his amount of support. But more than that, look how much closer she is to the leader. Gavin Newsom leads the field right now, but just with 21%. She is within 10 points of Gavin Newsom. I never thought I would have seen the day when someone as liberal as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is to the leader. She's 9 points back as opposed to what? 67 points back Bernie Sanders was a decade ago at this point. Democrats who say that their party leaders should be replaced. If you want an outsider, this is your time. This is your time. This is not what we were looking at a decade ago. Get this. 62% of Democrats say their party leaders should be replaced compared to just 24% who say no. You go back at the beginning of the Donald Trump presidency, the majority of Democrats said their party leaders were taking the party in the right direction. That is not the case anymore. We are dealing with a party base that wants to throw out the old and bring in the new and a party base that, as we've spoken about on this program before, is at its apex in terms of how liberal it is, with the majority of Democrats now saying that they are liberal, which is very different from where we were a decade ago when the majority of Democrats said that they were either moderate or conservative.
Pretty conclusive. And even for the Democrats in polls who self-identify as more moderate or conservative, they still agree with progressive policies when you go issue by issue. Now, one caveat is that even though the popularity of socialism is at an all-time high among Democrats, it's still unpopular among the broader electorate. So Democrats like Ezra Klein would argue that that's more of a reason to double down on capitalism like he wants us to, when let me explain why that would be disastrous, okay? Most Americans don't like socialism, but they love the policies associated with socialism. That's a fact. Medicare, Social Security, other policies. So how you sell a policy matters. Furthermore, the reason why Democrats have been slipping is because their base is disillusioned with the party. To win an election, you have to have your base on lock. You can't just assume that they're going to show up for you every 4 years or 2 years. You cannot win elections without your base. That's politics 101. They want the party to represent them, and they don't. And that is why Democrats are losing elections. As somebody who is a left-leaning voter, I can't remember the last time I was excited to vote for a Democrat. It's always been something that I've done begrudgingly to stop fascists. I think the last time was Obama in 2008. By 2012, it was clear that he wasn't as progressive as we thought he was. But nonetheless, that was the last time I was genuinely excited to vote for a Democrat. These days, you just don't see that enthusiasm unless it's somebody who's really unique, like Bernie Sanders or Zoran Mamdani. And a significant part of the problem is leadership, as Harry Anton pointed out. And to show you what I mean, look at how Hakeem Jeffries responded when he was asked about how Democratic Party voters want new leadership. He just simply won't even entertain the idea of resigning.
62% of the Democrats want to see the leadership of your party replaced. Do these sorts of polls make you rethink your approach at all? How do you view this?
Well, I think I understand why people all across the country, not just Democrats, are disturbed by what has been happening in this country and the extremism that has been unleashed on the American people. And we are in what I have referred to often as a more is more environment. We just have to continue to do more, to aggressively push back against the Trump administration. We're in a more is more environment, and we have to continue to do more. What I will say is that in special election after special election after special election, we keep winning.
That's fine. Just sidestep the question entirely and pretend as if you know what we want, because nobody's going to notice you doing that. Listen, he probably knows this, but we want him to resign because he refuses to do what the base wants. He's telling us what we want when in actuality, he knows what we really want, and he's not giving that to us. So really, he has the audacity to pretend as if he can speak for what we want, when this individual has his donor's hands up his ass controlling every fucking thing that he says. But regardless of what anyone says, it is important to understand that the people who keep pressuring the Democratic Party, like Ezra Klein, to shift to the right, these people are saboteurs. Either wittingly or unwittingly, they are saboteurs, full stop. They do not have our best interests in mind, and contrary to what they say, they don't know how to beat fascism, and they are the ones who aren't serious about defeating right-wing authoritarianism. Maybe, like, they're just really out of touch. That's possible, but odds are they know that the approach that lost Democrats 2 elections at a minimum is not going to revitalize the party. As Adam Johnson puts it, it's important to understand that the scramble to throw abortion, trans, and immigrant rights under a bus on the supposed altar of savvy, pragmatic compromise is 100% because they see it as the only place to go to pick up votes when left economic populism is 100% off the table for them. This is why there's been such a push lately to create space for taking on woke sacred cows, Abundance, Searchlight, Newsom. They're trying to reconstruct 1990s Clintonism of culture issue triangulation plus corporatism, because everything is up for debate except for corporatism. There's an obvious path for Dems to win back the working class, but it's off the table for places like CAP, Center for American Progress, Majority Democrats PAC, big donors, because it would radically undermine the way that they all get rich. And he's right. Now, I don't think that the individuals like Ezra Klein or his Democratic elected followers are stupid. I know that they see how popular politicians like Zohran Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, and AOC are, and they know that the base is yearning for progressive policies like Medicare for all. They know that the overwhelming majority of the base opposes Israel's genocide of Palestinians and wants them to stop being complicit with it. But they've made the choice to ignore what the base wants in order to keep the gravy train running. It's a choice that they made. So because they made this choice, as Adam Johnson points out, the pool of new voters that they could pick up are mythical moderates. It's a small pool of people. They're not necessarily fascist per se, but they feel a little bit uncomfortable about trans people and immigrants. They're anti-Trump Republicans, basically. It's a small group, maybe like 12 or so people, but they'd rather try to pick up those people than their own base. In other words, they would rather lose with mythical moderates than win with the base. And this is a choice that the Democratic establishment has made for us. And it's part of the reason why we're in the predicament that we're in the first place. We didn't just lose our democracy because millions of Americans stupidly voted for a fascist. We lost our democracy because millions of Americans stopped believing in the system. So much so that they didn't even bother voting at all because their lives are already bad and they didn't feel like Democrats would make things much better. Democrats know it's not going to be popular for them to abandon abortion or to keep supporting this genocide, but it's a sacrifice that they're willing to make in order to maintain the status quo. So if you care about restoring American democracy, you have to understand we need a strong, progressive Democratic Party that is willing to do what it takes to create a majority coalition to beat the fascists at the ballot box, assuming that we have free and fair elections in 2026 and 2028. And I have to make this pronouncement because anytime I criticize Democrats, people are saying, well, fascists are in power right now, so it seems like you're trying to help them. But no, I'm not trying to inadvertently help fascists by criticizing Democrats. I want to defeat the fascists, which is why I'm criticizing Democrats. This is constructive criticism that will help them win elections. It's important for us to vocalize our demands because if Democrats don't change and if they don't get their shit together and address the material conditions that facilitated the rise of fascism in the first place, this authoritarian hell that we're all living in might actually be permanent. And I don't want that to be the case, so I'm going to demand that Democrats change so we have at least a sliver of hope that we can get back to democracy and improve upon the democratic project that we've been building on. But that's not going to happen if the party continues to just ignore what the base wants. So that's why we have to criticize them. If you care, you criticize them. You force them to do better. Otherwise, Republicans will continue to run roughshod over us for the foreseeable future, which is something I don't want. So let's make sure we push them to be better.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? 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 They not like us. Tree? Tails on the bus. Oh, round and round. Tree? You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?